Hello, and welcome to KRAD COVID Readings on Trek Tuesday. I'm Keith R.A. DeCandido, doing my bits to cure the coronavirus blues by reading my writings. This year, I have continued to be going through my stories that I wrote for the Star Trek Starfleet Corps of Engineers series, which ran from 2000 until 2007. And I've already read my first two, which was the second ebook, which was called Fatal Error, and the sixth one, which was called Cold Fusion. The next two are going to be, were numbered 7 and 8, and it was a two-part story called Invincible, which was actually the only Star Trek story I've done that was a collaboration. This was in collaboration with David Mack. If you've read any Star Trek fiction over the past 20 years, you probably know the name David Mack. Dave is the New York Times bestselling author of the Destiny trilogy, of the Cold Equations trilogy, of about half of the books in the Vanguard series, and the Mirror Universe novel Sorrows of Empire, and any number of others. He's one of the most prolific Star Trek novelists that ever there was, which makes the story of Invincible even more interesting. Dave started out as a screenwriter. He actually graduated from NYU Film School in 1991, and he had intended to become a filmmaker, and to that end, he and John J. Ordover, who was one of the editors at Simon & Schuster, collaborated on several story pitches that they made to Star Trek Deep Space Nine and Star Trek Voyager. They actually sold 3 stories to them. The one they sold to Voyager wound up never getting produced. They sold the story, but they never made it. They did do 2 episodes of Deep Space Nine. They actually wrote the teleplay for the episode Starship Down, and wrote the story for the episode It's Only a Paper Moon, which then Ronald D. Moore wrote the script off of. And they also wrote a Star Trek Next Generation Deep Space Nine crossover comic book for Wildstorm called Divided We Fall. And Dave also did some, on his own, did some nonfiction work here and there. Nonfiction, like the New Frontier Minipedia that was in an omnibus book, and the Starfleet Survival Guide, which was a guide to surviving various situations when you're in Starfleet. But Dave had never written dramatic prose when we were working on Invincible, and he asked me to work with him. Basically, Dave wrote a very detailed plot outline, and then I wrote the story based on that, which then he went over and worked on, and we did it together. Dave just didn't feel confident enough writing straight prose to do it on his own. I thought he was out of his mind, but whatever. And then the next story he came up with was called Wildfire, and he did that one on his own, and that was his first full-length story. We'll talk about that later. So we did Invincible, which was, as I said, 2 parts. So basically over the course of both March and April, I will be reading Invincible, book 1, followed by book 2, which will be episodes 93 and 94 of KRAD COVID Readings. And this one was a little different in that we told it in an epistolary style. Rather than straight narrative prose, each portion of the story is a log entry, a letter, a transcript of a conversation, something like that. And so that's how we put that together. It was a lot of fun to do this. And this story, Invincible, takes place at the same time as Cold Fusion, which I read last month, and focuses almost entirely on Commander Sonia Gomez, who was absent from Cold Fusion. We base the story on the real-world events of the Tsavo Alliance. If you've ever seen a 1990s movie called The Ghost in the Darkness, which starred Val Kilmer and Michael Douglas, that was based on the real-world story of the Tsavo Alliance. In fact, what's interesting is that the actual real story that it's based on was way more interesting than the movie was. Although it is an interesting movie and worth watching. But this is a science fictional version of the story of the Tsavo Alliance. And so, without further ado, here is Invincible, Book 1, Part 1, by David Mack and Keith R.A. DeCandido. First Officer's Log. Commander Sonia Gomez, USS Da Vinci, Stardate 53270.2. I'm leaving the Da Vinci. Luckily, it's only a temporary assignment to the planet Sarandar. Captain Scott gave me the assignment after we dropped the old Defiant off at Space Dock. Sarandar is located in a fairly remote region. It'll take a week just to get out there from Earth. But it's in an area of space controlled by the Nilori. That area is pretty much all that stands between the Federation and exploration of Sector 969. I remember when I was on the Enterprise, Command had considered having us map that out, but ultimately decided against it. The Nilori would not permit a Starfleet vessel safe passage through their space, and going around would add several months to the journey. I told Captain Scott that when we met in his office on Earth. He laughed. "Hi, lassie, that Nilori are a right unpleasant bunch. There was a border clash with them a couple 100 years ago. That was before even my time. We gave them a good punch to the nose, and they went back to their space with their tails between their legs. They haven't been too keen on the Federation ever since." "So what's changed?" I asked him. The usual. They need our help." The captain called up a holographic projection of Sarandar. As he spoke, the image rotated, then went in for a close view of a section of the surface. The entire planet appeared to be made of crystal. I can't wait to see what it looks like in person. "Sarandar is completely scan and transporter proof, thanks to an element called chimerium." That surprised me. "Really? You know of it then?" I nodded. "It's a composite of magnesite and kelbonite. They found minute traces here and there, but, well, Sarandar's loaded with it, and the Nilori are trying to make use of it. We need to refine it first, but how can they mine it? It's much too dense to move manually. I don't know of any ship that could achieve escape velocity with a significant amount on board. You can't transport it, you couldn't get a lock. I don't even think a dimensional shifter would work." I ran a bunch of possibilities in my head, then remembered a paper I'd done at the Academy. "Wait! If you can put together a subspace accelerator to push it with a quick warp pulse." Captain Scott smiled that avuncular smile of his. "Congratulations, lassie. You've worked out in 2 minutes what it took those bloody Nilori a couple of centuries to figure out. In fact, they already designed themselves a subspace accelerator. But they're falling behind schedule, and there's a lot of bugs in the system. So they asked for Starfleet's help. Thing is, they still didn't like the Federation very much. And they like Starfleet even less. So they'll only let us send one person, in order, if you can believe it, to minimize cultural contamination. As if contamination is what they're worried about." He shook his head. "The good news is that one person will be in charge of the whole kit and caboodle." "And I'm supposed to be that one person?" "Aye," Scott nodded. "And you'll be in command. The last supervisor quit in disgust, so that's where there's a vacancy, and they figured they'd be better off with Starfleet's help at the very top. I've read the paper you wrote about subspace accelerators. It's why I recommended you specifically." That threw me for a loop. I never thought that Montgomery Scott, of all people, would find some old Academy paper of mine to be the least bit interesting. "Really, sir?" Laughing, he said, "Hi, really? Thought it was brilliant, actually. Why do you think I recommended you to David back when he was trolling for someone to head up his S.C.E. team after poor Commander Salek died during the war?" He had not only read my Academy paper, it was what led him to recommend me to Captain Gold for the Da Vinci. Wonder upon wonders. I don't know. I didn't know that, sir." "Well, now you do." We went over the other details of the mission. In addition to the chimerium problem, Sarandar is also in a star system that is home to a quasar-pulsar pair that interferes with communications and navigation. You'll only be able to send messages from the surface once every 14 hours or so. For that matter, you'll only be able to do any useful testing during those windows. The biggest annoyance, though, was the revelation that the Nilori are a bit, well, backward about gender roles. The engineering team consists of several civilians made up of numerous Nilori male races, all male. Women don't do this sort of work in Nilori society. "Wonderful," I said. "So you're asking me to head a team that hates Starfleet, hates the Federation, and hates women?" For the first time, Captain Scott sounded like a captain when he asked, "Is that a problem, Commander?" "No, sir," I said with full confidence. "I can handle it." The avuncular smile returned, and he sounded like an engineer again. "That's what I like to hear. You'll be heading out with the Da Vinci to Starbase 96, where you'll be meeting up with a civilian ship called the Culloden. It'll take you the rest of the way. Then Captain Scott put his hand on my shoulder. I can't emphasize how important this mission is, Lassie. The Nilori have been showing us their backs for almost 2 centuries. This is the first time they've extended a hand. We may finally get the chance to explore Sector 969, and this is our first chance to study Chimerium up close. The captain had that glint in his eye that Lieutenant Commander Duffy once described as the new toy to play with look. And he was right. Chimerium has uncounted tactical uses, particularly against a technologically superior foe like the Borg or the Dominion. Don't worry, sir. I won't let you down. Oh, of that, Commander, I have very little doubt. Now be off with you. I've got an appointment. We're now en route to Starbase 96. I've been studying everything there is to know about the Nilori in general, and Sarandar in particular. Which, unfortunately, isn't much. The latest updates on the Sarandar project are 2 months old, and the information in the cultural database is sketchy at best. I'm going to have to talk with our cultural specialist, Carol Abramowitz, before we reach the Starbase to go over some of this. One interesting thing, while the nation is called the Nilori Republic, the Nilori race is only one of the 5 members of that republic, and it looks like the work crew has representation from all 5. The design of the S.A. is generally sound, but they've over-designed it to an appalling degree, and some aspects of the engineering are, to be blunt, wrong, and will need to be fixed post-haste. It's going to be a challenge to get the project up to speed, but I'm looking forward to it. Personal log. Commander Sonia Gomez, USS Da Vinci, stardate 53271.5. I think I need to kill Kieran. Before the mess with the Defiant and Tholians, we had hit the latest in a series of landmines regarding our relationship, if you can call it that. What we had on the Enterprise was wonderful, while it lasted. When I transferred off, though, we weren't really able to keep it up, since we got thrown together on the Da Vinci again, it's been one awkward moment after another. When we're on duty, everything's fine, but the minute we are we see each other in the mess hall, it gets, well, messy. But then he had command of the Da Vinci against the Tholians when Captain Gold and I were on the Defiant, and he did great. I'm happy for him. It's been a shot in the arm to his confidence, and what he really needed, to be honest. The thing is, he's getting more aggressive with me. Yesterday, we went over the duty rosters for when I'd be gone, and he sat closer to me than usual. His hand brushed against mine more than once, too. When some minor crisis in engineering came up, he suggested finishing in his quarters later, which he's never done before. Not even when we were actually dating on the Enterprise. But then it was easier to keep business and a personal life separate on a Galaxy-class ship. The Da Vinci is a much smaller, more intimate ship. I think he wants to start up what we had on the Enterprise again, and I just don't know if I can handle that. For one thing, I'm his CO. And look at what we do. What if I'd been trapped in that dimensional rift, or on Ehrlich's moon? What if the Da Vinci had been destroyed by the Tholians, or the Pevney, or Friend, or the Andrasi? What if I had to order him to go to his death? That's why I just can't give him an answer yet. We'll be at Starbase 96 tomorrow, so at least I can get away from him. And he'll be in charge of the S.C.E. team while I'm gone, so he can put that newfound confidence to good use. Sooner or later, though, I'm going to have to deal with this. Later. Definitely later. Personal log, Commander Sonia Gomez, SS Culloden, stardate 53273.9. This may be the most beautiful sight I've ever seen. We're just starting to descend into Sarandar's atmosphere on the Culloden. The ship is owned by Zilder, a Bolian, who is hired by the Nilori to ferry people to and from the surface and perform various other technical and administrative tasks for the projects. When I asked him how a Bolian contrived to get a ship named after him, after a place on Earth, he just smiled and said, "Honig will provide." That's the really odd thing about Zilder. Honig is the collective god of the Damiani, a humanoid, three-gendered Federation species. I didn't think that anyone off of Damiano worshipped their god. It wouldn't bother me, except Zilder spent the first day of our trip trying to convert me. After over 20 hours of his missionary zeal, I'd convinced him that my religion was none of his business, and that he led up. If he hadn't, he'd be easy enough to avoid. The Culloden is built to transport up to 300 people, so with just the two of us, it's pretty roomy. But I was talking about Sarandar. From space, the planet looks mostly white, almost like it's a big snowball flying through the night. As you get into orbit, it starts to look more like a jewel. At the right time of day, from the right orbit, you can see glints and reflections. According to what I've read, the plant and animal life is all silicon-based, and the vast majority of it is crystalline. We're descending now, and it's even more amazing than I could have believed. When you come out of the reddish-purple layer of clouds, you look up and you see an orange sky. As expected, the delicate flora is photosynthetic, living crystal. What I didn't realize is that the ground is also made up of similar substances. Jagged plains of diamond spikes, quartz and topaz mountains, and forests of amethyst. The water of the streams and rivers that I can see from the Culloden's viewpoint are sparkling and crystal clear, literally. Now we're flying in closer, and I can see some animals that I recognize from the file. A she-eye drinking from the stream, a mere guiding through the air, a pack of Cleor running in the forest. The suns are starting to set, so the shadows and the reflections are especially spectacular, with colors bursting from all the crystalline flora. Intellectually, I expected this to be a lovely planet, but I had no idea it was going to be this beautiful. Now we're seeing something less beautiful, the work site for the S.A. The prominent feature of the site is the perfectly circular 200-meter diameter concave dish. In the center is an opening roughly 4 meters wide. The surface of the dish is incomplete, just an empty skeletal framework. Turning it into a full dish is part of what I need to accomplish here. The site's also dotted in many places by slender metallic towers that hold sensor pallets. The long shadows cast by the sun set at sunsetting make it look very eerie. We're about to land. I think I'm looking forward to this. Supplemental, Planet Sarandar. I'm now settled in my tent. That's right, tent. I'm in a canvas tent. Not even a proper Starfleet shelter, but a tent. I don't even know where to start. The equipment I've seen is old and horribly maintained. Old I can live with. Since joining the S.C.E., I've dealt with everything ranging from 3,000-year-old computers to 100-year-old starships to state-of-the-art Andrasi security devices. It's the badly maintained part that's going to cause headaches. The only weapons on the planet are sonic pistols and rifles that look like they're about 1,000 years old. Light-based directed energy weapons would be tantamount to suicide on a planet with so much crystalline flora and fauna. The beams would refract all over the place. So I didn't even take a phaser with me, though I did bring a Starfleet-issued sonic rifle as a backup. We're not likely to need weapons, but it's good to be prepared, especially given the unfortunate state of the Nelori's armament. They don't have food replicators. The food is all cooked with these chemical stoves that don't work half the time. The food is stored in freezer units that also don't work half the time, so a lot of it is spoiled. In fact, Zilder had picked up some fresh food when he went to get me at the starbase. It got a much better reception than I did. Which leads me to the workers themselves. As expected, they're a mix. But most of them are either Nelori or Osina. The Nelori are humanoid, with skin tones ranging from medium ash gray to almost charcoal. Their eyes, by contrast, are almost uniformly black, with no apparent pupils. They practice a form of ritual scarring of the forearms and face. According to the database, this marks rites of passage like adolescence, adulthood, marriage, birth of sons, veneration of elders, and so on, which Carol confirmed. Most of the men are bald, though I have no idea if that's biology or fashion, with long braided chin beards of pale violet hair. And they hate my guts. Okay, maybe that's a little harsh, but when Zilder introduced me to the foreperson, a large man named Kajana, I could feel the disdain oozing out of his pores. The only one who wasn't hostile was Razka. He showed me to my tent. My tent! And said he'd be serving as liaison between me and the workers. He seems nice enough. At least he didn't glare at me, so maybe this won't be so bad. And since I'm both in charge and the only woman, I get my own tent. Every other tent has 4 people in it. Lucky me. I'm going to try and get some sleep, then see what I can do in the morning. But I already miss the Da Vinci. First Officer's Log, Commander Sonia Gomez. Planet Sarandar, Stardate 53274.1. My first day on Sarandar was spent being given a tour of the S.A. site by Razka. After a breakfast of cold oatmeal because the main cooking unit broke down, and I didn't think to bring my own stove. The design flaws that I found in the specs for the SA are exacerbated by the shoddy work and a backward method of implementation. The first thing I did was order the detail assigned to construct the tubing for the delivery system to stop that and help in the digging of the hole for the antimatter reactor. The warp pulse is going to require the most testing, and it needs to be in place long before the tubing has to be finished. Kajano wasn't happy about this, and the workers even less so. Digging is much harder work after all, but they agreed. Another problem are the anti-grav units, which are slow and go offline regularly, which slows the work down. After pointing this out to me, Razga said, "Welcome to Sarandar. This is the worst place in the galaxy. Nothing works here." "That's going to change," I said, and proceeded to stop the tour, sit down, and look at one of the anti-gravs. "It's pointless, you know," Razga said cheerfully. "We've poked and prodded that thing for days at a time. Everything's in working order, it just doesn't work. This planet is cursed, you see." I don't believe in curses. I do, however, believe in faulty diagnostic routines. Razga frowned at that. "What?" "The diagnostic routine's all messed up. It's in test mode." I put the diagnostic program into the right mode, and it started listing all the things that were wrong with the unit. They're probably all like this. I called the assistant foreperson, Jiro, over. Jiro was a member of the Osina, an insectoid race. Nothing like the Nassats, though. They have large compound eyes, tentacles instead of the more arm-like extremities that P8 Blue has, and 6 rather than 8 of those extremities. None of them have Patty's sparkling personality either. The one trait they share with the Nassats, though, is the ability to stand upright on their hind legs. This anti-grav's diagnostic program's in test mode, so probably are the others. Fix that, then you know how to fix the units themselves. I want a detail assigned to take care of this. Jiro's voice sounded like an angry bird chirp after a predator attacked its nest. "It still won't work." "Maybe not, but you're going to do it anyway." "Why should I?" Before I could reply, Razga said, "Because if you do what she says and it still doesn't work, you'll prove that you're right and that you're the smart one." Amazingly enough, that seemed to work. Jiro didn't say anything, but did start working on the unit. He didn't actually pull a detail together, but I decided to take what I could get. My next task was to streamline the construction of the magnetic containment unit, which should have been completed by now. The workers assigned to that task were about as receptive to my orders as Jiro, but they went ahead and implemented the new duty schedule. Finally, I went to the camp hospital to meet the doctor, a Galamite man named Dolan. Apparently he had been hired by the Nalori government because of his work with silicon-based life forms. This assignment is proving to be much more challenging than I thought, but I'm confident that with Razga's help, I can accomplish our goal. To be continued next week. Thank you very much for watching. By the way, the reference to the Tholians and the Defiant, that was the two-part book Interphase, books 1 and 2 by Dayton Ward and Kevin Dillmore, which were the stories that came out right before Cold Fusion. Anyway, thank you very much for watching. Tune in next week for part 2 of book 1. And check me out online, please. I'm at DeCandido.net. You can read my blog at DeCandido.wordpress.com. You can support me on Patreon at patreon.com/KRAD. And find me all over social media. I'm on Facebook, I'm on Twitter, I'm on Instagram. You can read my stuff on Tor.com, all sorts of nifty stuff. Thank you very much for watching. I'll see you next week. And please, stay safe.